Coogs house. I've got great news. College sports have been saved by the politicians in Washington, or at least they tell us that. And even if it was, are we sure that's what Houston wants?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs Daily Podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day. You do every day as the everydayer that you are. If you want to join the conversation but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below if your high school, wherever the farthest school you finished at it, did they offer a government course? Because that's making me stuff about today is making me wonder if people took that or not. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. We got America's #1 sportsbook and more on that later. But I do want to start in the first segment by talking about the executive order passed by President Donald Trump on Thursday. Talk about that in the first segment and continue into the second segment with should they be doing what they're doing and should Houston want them to continue to do what they're doing. I also saw the big news as well in the SEC, ACC, all the ACC falling apart stuff with North Carolina. That's the third segment. But first, if you were sleeping under a rock, you missed it. Bigger things going on. President Donald Trump did issue an executive order on Thursday titled Saving College Sports. It's an executive order. So that means it's officially not law. It's not like legally replacing law and policies. It's a directive to the executive branch, which it should be pointed out is also not the same thing as Congress for the folks that maybe don't remember that part from school. Directs other federal offices and agencies, including in this order specifically, the Attorney General, Federal Trade Commission, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Labor, National Labor Relations Board, all to pursue different ways to ensure the long-term availability of, to repair, and to protect college sports. That's as broad as it is. I should point out that in the last 6 months, the administration had done different things to say they wanted to initially shrink the Department of Education and Labor Relations and Labor Departments. And so some of that is confusing, but that's where we're at right now, right? I will say that the big crux of this is aimed at this idea that kids are getting paid to play, but it takes direct shot at a 2021 case when NCAA versus Alston went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled 9-0, which is unanimous. Things never happen in the Supreme Court. They don't never happen, but it feels increasingly rare. We, in a world as politically divided we are these days, the Supreme Court was unanimous in saying that limiting education-related compensation violates Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act, right? And so that doesn't say anything about pay for play or anything. And the White House said it was trying to eliminate pay for play and the idea of fair market value compensation and third party for brand endorsements would all be okay, but it doesn't cite anything that has anything to do with pay for play, and pay for play is kind of not okay legally right now anyway. I know that there's technicalities around that, but this all stems from the idea, the perception of pay for play, even in a world where we live in where technically that's not allowed anyway, right? Further, fair market value for some of these endorsement things are always subjective. That's the point of marketing. If a car dealership thinks that putting the local Power 4 quarterback on the billboard in the team color, generic team color uniform is worth $2.5 million in marketing budget, that's the market value. That's how capitalism works. And endorsement deals are entirely based on that, and they're kind of inherently unquantifiable. But I think the thing that makes this the most challenging thing to do, and I don't mean to make this easy. I don't. It's just the executive order saying to take out pay for play, but is okay with the idea of endorsements. But the way you improve your value as to other endorsement opportunities is by being good at football or basketball or whatever. Yes, star quarterbacks are more marketable and have more valuable in marketing senses. So they're going to get a lot of money. And spoiler, being the starting pitcher, starting shortstop for the Yankees or the Dodgers, the high point person for the Lakers, the Knicks, the quarterback for the Cowboys, Dak Prescott, like these guys make a lot of money in marketing because of their locale as well. So in a world where you have people like to buy cameos and have speaker appearances, or even just like fees for just being there, appearance fees, right? Like, this is a world where we put arbitrary values on people's faces, literally their faces. Now, I don't know why you're doing this one, except for that it's free here on YouTube to look at my face talking about sports. That probably tells you a lot about how much my value is these days. But ultimately, we place arbitrary, unquantifiable values on these things naturally. And the better the athlete, the higher that dollar is. I got a wall of sneakers behind me that I know at least two commenters are critical of frequently, right? There's a lot of Michael Jordan sneakers back there because of how really good he was at basketball. There's other guys too, other players, a couple Kobe's. These are actually Hakeem Olajuwon, right? The cool stuff, right? There aren't a whole lot of Bill Cartwrights back there. That doesn't work the same way. The higher end athletes, the better athletes will be more marketable, and that is what makes this challenging. It's not that people are being paid to play officially yet. I understand there needs to be some sort of a tangible, like, turn in. Well, where did you post their picture using your product? Well, we don't know if that one picture is worth the value, but and that's all, I guess, semantics and going through the hurdles and the legal hoopla. And certain schools are going to get hit on that more than others, I guess, and whatever. But ultimately, this executive order is seeking to eliminate a thing that was technically already eliminated. It's a gigantic nothing burger. Federal agencies have been involved since like December, January of 2024 5 in an attempt to get pay for play away, get payment from the schools to fall under Title IX. I should point out that the current administration took away that Title IX deal in February of 2025 as well, but it's not quite this as far as like preserving and saving things. It seems to be inconsistent with some of the previous deals. It's also, I guess, in a large scale form, a way to try and revert sports back to, the toothpaste back in the tube or whatever, closing back up Pandora's box. And that just doesn't work anymore. It's an attempt to like enforce some sort of a cap on earnings, somewhat like the house cap, but that doesn't work because it was ruled in the Supreme Court that violates the Antitrust Act. And we'll get to the SCORE Act in a second, in the second segment, and how that may actually be, in some weird way, the way this twists into formulating and working. But the biggest piece of the executive order signed to save college sports on Thursday was essentially something that's already happening. Saving college sports is a great PR headline. It's got nothing to do with anything, though. College sports are no different on July 25th than they were on July 23rd because of this executive order. I could go into on and on about how like executive orders are just directives to the executive branch. Now the executive branch has 1/3 of the power inherently, and how the different branches of government have like this isn't that big a thing that still would need a lot of oversight from Congress and pushing this. But the SCORE Act is already being talked about in Congress, and that's already kind of being shaped up to do different things. The government's not set up to run on executive orders. It gets the wheels churning and moving and directions set, but you need SCOTUS rulings, or Supreme Court rulings, I should say, or you need Congress, you need the House, you need people to push things through. And Supreme Court and the Congress have already kind of said their piece on this, and have already said pay for play is not what we're doing here. But there's no way to limit this endorsement piece. And so I understand the nostalgia for the olden days. And the SCORE Act is something currently in Congress set up to kind of work through this. I want to talk through that. But more importantly, in all this reversion to move to a different version of non-Wild Wild West, I think a lot of people think that this will help Houston, and that the Houston fans should want this. And I want to talk about that in the second segment, because I don't always agree with that. I want to talk about that second segment because first, today's show is brought to you by everybody's over at FanDuel. Now, summer sports are in full swing, and swing is intentional. They're swinging tennis rackets, baseball bats, swing your leg in a soccer match, whatever the case, golf clubs, anything. FanDuel is the best way to make every sporting event more exciting. You're already following that action all week long. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? Get on the game while your friends are out getting sunburned at the beach. That's going to be me next week. I'm going to come back really, really red, I promise. Now, listen, I like same game parlays. It kind of makes me, I like to put things together, think I know what's going to happen. I really, really like though on FanDuel the live in matchup action as well. So go to FanDuel.com. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers bet just $5 and get $150 back at bonus bets if your first bet hits. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Programs are Locked On Cougs here, and a lot of the push for the idea of saving college sports is this idea of trying to control the wild west of payments to athletes, because we do live in a world, right, where like high level athletes on marketability make a lot of money that is now being, after over a century of not being paid to play to be athletes in college technically, right? We know the pony excess happened, we know what A&M was doing, we know, etc., right? Or was it Luther Campbell was the guy, the hip hop guy that was paying money to guys in Miami? Like those things did happen. Now we don't have to act like they didn't happen anymore. But there's this people want to go back to the old ways of doing things. And I kind of separate this in two ways. One, I want to make very clear, I personally do not think it is, just like from a moral perspective, right to limit what other people make. Listen, 1.6% of Division One college football players will play a down in an NFL game. Even if you include Canadian football, you're looking at about 2% of Division One college football players. 1.2% of Division One college basketball players, men's basketball players, will play in the NBA. If you expand that to international leagues, you're looking at about 3.8% play and are paid to play somewhere in the world. In women's basketball, which is not quite the same revenue gainer, but it's clearly a growing, booming, it's shooting up charts. Less than a single percent, 0.9%, less than a single percent of women's college basketball players will get paid to play at a professional level. The highest percentage is ice hockey, which is 7.1%, but that's international sport. It's over it's over a third of those athletes are not from the United States. We're not talking about or whatever, right? But also over a third of those college athletes are not from the United States. It's also international sports, and there's a lot of places to play, to get paid to play. It's also a sport that's just 60 programs, right? Like there's only 60 Division One men's hockey programs, right? And so across the board here, a lot, like the overwhelming, over 19 out of 20 college Division One athletes will not be paid to play after college. That's just the way it works, right? And while they have this chance to capitalize on a few years, like your eligibility clock starts and it stops, and it is a short window. And if you have the opportunity to cash in, I cannot fault you for doing that. You've worked your entire life to that point to be as talented as you are. I don't think it's right from a moral perspective to put limits on that earning. Further, the ideas of guys that are coaching and whatever, like there's no limit on what coaches can make. There's no limit on what schools can make from their Nike contract. There's no limit on anything else in this, right? And so I just don't think that's right. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm in the majority there. I totally get that. I feel like I need to preface that the next part of this with that, because that will shape and color how I talk about the SCORE Act. And the SCORE Act is in Congress right now. It sets to set NIL standards and grant antitrust protection to the NCAA and to the conferences. It wants to preempt state laws about trying to circumvent these scores. It's going to preempt those as well, and it's going to try and cement that student athletes are not formally employees, meaning this cannot be collectively bargained at any point. The same way the CBA and pro sports works. You always hear about the labor. I mean, there's a whole thing with the NFL, CBA right now, and the NFLPA and all that right now. Shouts to all the crazy stuff going on over there, right? All of that is to say that there's also some part about protections for Olympic sports by tying the amount of money you're allowed to as a school pay your head coach to the number of sports you offer. And so theoretically, if you pay a bajillion dollars to your head football coach, you have to also have a handful of, non-revenue seeking sports, right? That's the way that thing shakes out. And the SCORE Act would never pass in collective bargaining because it caps so many different limits and puts caps so many things and limits so different ways to make money, but it doesn't have to. It just has to pass Congress, right? And it does feel like it brings back to me the idea of a bag man, because there'll be NIL caps, but there will be NIL and like the wink, wink, nudge, nudge thing happening all over sports. The stories about like random slot machines at gas stations in the middle of nowhere in small town, insert state here, that randomly drops a rack every time a football player pulls the thing down. Oh, crazy. They go out first thing in the morning, get their gas, get a rack on the pull. That's crazy. That happens every single time. What luck. Or the car wash that makes a couple bands every Saturday by just doing a car wash in the athlete dorm parking lot. Like these random stories of things that were just gigantic, glaring issues with, we call it the bag man idea in college sports from before. I feel like all this SCORE Act will do is revert us back to that. And so I think that's why I'm hesitant to do it at all. I do think that if enforced and if stringent, and here's where I will, put back on my Houston Cougar glasses, I do think that a watering down and a leveling of the field will help Houston, right? Houston, as a program, as a department, was shut off of big time athletics for 30 years, or more round numbers, 30 years, right? Theoretically, the growth, the dollars, the investment, right? All of those things that other schools got when they made the jump from the Southwest Conference to the Big 12, that other power conferences got over that 30-year window. Houston was left out of that. And now they're in it and competing and building and trying to make up for lost time. And I would argue, given the constraints, doing extremely well. We argue that every day here, how well they're doing given those constraints and given that timeline. Setting some parameters on this would help level the playing field and give Houston room to catch up. So I get the Houston Cougar fan arguing that, and frankly, the Houston Cougar fan in me, when I put that hat back on, right, argues, okay, let's even this out. Let's make this level, and let's really give Houston a chance to get back in the game, because you kicked this out a while back, and now we're fighting and clawing away back in, right? And so I get that setting some parameters might help stabilize the transfer field, and so you don't lose, preseason All-American guys into the transfer portal a couple hours after the spring football game. Like that could be important and helpful to a football program, right? Adding hoops to jump through to make sure that your NIL stuff clears would at least make it more challenging for other schools to be doing those kinds of things. It does feel like it's trying to revert something back to like a pre-2020 kind of system. And I will say that while that was maybe fairer in a lot of ways, I still don't know that it was fair. And I say that to say that there were still disadvantages in not being a handful of programs back then, right? There just were. We can talk about Bagman. We can pull up random stories. We can also just look at the way things were going. There was still a cream of the crop, the blue bloods, etc. All the favoritism from all different ways, and the system was still helping them out, right? Now, what I worry about the SCORE Act, even with my Houston Cougar cap on, right? And again, I want to stress that I understand that there are two different caps there. But with my Houston Cougar cap on, I worry that with the SCORE program, the SCORE Act, if you're limiting NIL, what does that do to, like, I guess Houston has no gymnastics team famously because Simone Biles has said she would coach it and yada, yada, yada. But to the gymnastics star trying to become a YouTube sensation and make some sponsorship dollars, the golfer that was trying to take money from his local course to play there and use his name, image, and likeness to, like, what caps are you putting on and how do those get played out? Do those athletes end up suffering because we can't just be fair in the football field, right? Like it does that shape up and hurt them as well in a way that we're maybe not calculating into this. And I don't mean to say there's no unintended consequences or anything, and I don't mean to say the world is perfect with the way it is right now, right? I understand all of that. And I understand that I'm putting on two different hats in the single segment here, talking about how those things work. But man, I just we already worried about taking the toothpaste out of the tube in 2021. Uh, you can't just keep pushing toothpaste out of the tube to make it better in 2025, right? Like at the end of the day, it doesn't go back in, and I just I worry. I worry. Now I do think though that things are changing. I don't know if the executive order signed on Thursday is the thing changing them, but we will see if I'm wrong there. I'm sure when I am, people will clip this and tell me I've said worse. All right. I want to jump into the third segment. Talk some about other things changing, including the ACC and SEC and how those Tar Heels may be shedding some light on the whole situation changing. And frankly, had the executive order not been passed, this probably would have led the show. But first, Locked on Coogs, Parker Ranch here, talking about the ACC blowing up. It sounds like there's real push. I believe On3 had it first. I might have misread the Twitter thread there, whatever group was there first. But it does feel like North Carolina is at least exploring the idea of leaving the ACC and heading to the SEC, which was shocking to me. I kind of pegged them as more of a Big Ten school. And listen, I've said it this week in talking about Memphis, actually, that I thought a lot of things were going to change in 2031 because by that point, the exit payment for the ACC was down to 75 million, which is way easier to stomach, way more feasible than the current 500 plus, right? Now, with that said, if a couple of different schools want to join into this, if Carolina and Duke and Clemson and Florida State, who at least two of those schools have talked about the SEC in the past, if they wanted to jump ship, they could probably get some sort of a an SEC entity to help pay for them to get there, right? I think that that's part of this. The ACC would have essentially, in that instance, replaced Carolina and maybe Florida State, maybe Clemson, maybe even Duke with Stanford, Cal, and SMU. And listen, there's no world where the rest of the conference is okay with that. There's really not any world where the ESPNs and the Foxes and the big TV dollars paying for that conference are okay with that swap either, right? That's just not a one-to-one exchange. And it feels like that would be the next big like shoot a drop in shifting these power conference landscapes further, right? This is just like the Memphis news to me. And that after the initial, oh, whoa, that's crazy thought, the second thought is, okay, why did this get leaked? Because someone said, hey, press send. This didn't just randomly happen on Thursday. This has been building. People at some point behind the scenes somewhere on, even if it was as recently as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, knew about this. So why did this just get hit? Why did it just send this on Thursday? And I wonder, full honesty, was it Yormark or a Big 12 president or AD that knew about this that said, hey, press send on Thursday after some of the pushback, the blowback in wake of the Memphis news? There were people across media and things like, the Big 12 is turning down a lot of sponsorship dollars from Memphis. That doesn't seem very, since when has cash ever not been king in this sport, right? Like there's a lot of people questioning that, right? I also think for what it's worth that there's an idea here that maybe North Carolina is leaking it to see if someone else wants to jump in. They've heard other, in 2023, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, they heard other ACC schools that were not happy with the ACC and programs not happy with the ACC, and they felt like-minded the SEC. So the North Carolina saying, hey, SEC, we can go do that. And listen, this is not an SEC show. This is not a North Carolina show. This is not an ACC show. This is a Houston Cougar show, and that is in the Big 12. And the fallout here is what's important, because if you knew about this at all, as a conference, the potential for this at all as a conference, suddenly not letting Memphis in, a former Houston rival, even though it would have paid Houston a couple $1 million a year for the next 5 years, and would have paid all member schools a couple $1 million a year for the next 5 years, makes a lot more sense because if the ACC could potentially fall apart, you don't want to potentially have given a spot. These things can't be infinitely big. You don't want to have potentially given a spot to a program like a Memphis when like a Virginia Tech, a Louisville, a North Carolina State, Miami, even Clemson, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, any of the ACC schools, Pitt, go get them, right? Insert rivalry with West Virginia right here. It's not far from Cincinnati either, geographically right there. Syracuse, pull them on in, dude. Like all those things would make sense as well. And I really think there is a world here, right, where the ACC's top 12 brands get divided up in a way that suddenly the Power 3 conferences each have about 20 schools. So be adding 4 schools to the Big 12. And in terms of that 20, 30, 31 summer when the whole thing gets reshuffled and the Big 12 contracts are up, suddenly you've also added brands like Louisville, Miami. I like Miami as a brand. I don't think it's actually as profitable. I just like the idea of having another city university in, but and for what it's worth, they are a private university. It's a little bit different. Coral Gables, yada yada, right? As fun as those football programs were, it is a little bit different situation than it was. I mean, always been a different situation than it was in the 80s, I guess. But I say all that to say that as a Big 12 school, Houston fans should keep an eye on this thing happening because when we look up at how much money the institution is going to make to pay house settlement money, to fund facilities, to pay for coaching staffs, right? How much money the school is making in 2031 to 3 will be directly correlated to where the conference is and what schools are in it. We're looking at that shifting again. We just are. It's too much happening in this 1 week for it just be all smoke, no fire. That's just not how these things work, right? Further, I'd point out that ultimately, Houston did join the Big 12 at a time when back then they were down to 8 schools. They felt like they lost a lot of mojo. You could have argued that, and I would argue this podcast wasn't quite around yet, but I would argue that the 4 schools that joined the Big 12 in the first wave of Big 12 editions helped save the Big 12 in a lot of ways. You could have easily lost Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State to the Big 10 and just suddenly not at a conference, right? And I think that those 4 schools deserve credit, Houston included, credit for saving it. And now you've gone from saving the conference by adding Houston, Cincinnati, Central Florida, BYU, to suddenly looking to be one of the 3 dogs left standing. And I feel like it means that you did that right. You hit your horse the right wagon in a lot of ways in your mark in the Big 12. And I'm not saying there were a bunch of people beating down Houston's door back in like 2021, but in 2021 you did have, coming off of an American Athletic Conference Championship game appearance, being an SEC school in their backyard, in your bowl game. You had a Final Four in the spring of 2021. Like things were looking good for the program. And it's nice to know that while I don't know how many options you realistically had, getting into the Big 12 was a big deal for a lot of reasons, history included, but it feels like it was also the right option, even if you had others. And so more on that as things unfold. And obviously, if the ACC officially blows up, there'll be a lot more on that. There is a more Houston Cougar-centric bonus edition out today as well, talking about the NCAA regional being in H-Town and Houston being able to play in it now. Talk about that. So check that out as well. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Cougs today. If you're looking for a second listen, I'm going to say go listen to Locked On College Basketball. Locked On Cougs, primarily Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.